Oil is burning in the Baltic region, but it's not because Putin has finally pulled the trigger and started a war with the Baltic states. No, it's Ukraine that has just struck again, and its target was a key Russian port in the Baltic Sea that Putin needs to keep the oil money flowing in. That port has been annihilated, and Putin now has to deal with Russia losing something that it can never replace. Overnight on March 23rd, Ukraine unleashed more of its drones against Russia. That alone may not seem newsworthy. Ukraine's long-range strategy is long established, so yet another strike should come as no surprise. But this attack was different. Ukraine's target on March 23rd was Primorsk, which is in the Leningrad Oblast and is home to the Transneft oil terminal, which is one of the most important oil export hubs in the Russian Federation. Primorsk allows Putin to ship his illicit oil via Russia's shadow fleet to buyers all over the world, and Ukraine just flung something so powerful at that port that it has forced a shutdown that could last for days, if not weeks. We'll get into the weapon that Ukraine likely used in this latest attack in a few minutes. First, there are the results. In its latest strike against Russia's energy and oil export infrastructure, Ukraine has targeted fuel storage tanks throughout the port that were being used to store oil products intended for shipment to other countries by Russia. There are two stories here, what Russia says Ukraine did and what satellite photos from the Primorsk port are showing us. Russia hasn't tried to lie its way out of being hit, at least. According to the Astra Telegram channel, the Leningrad Oblast governor Alexander Drozdenko has reported that Ukraine's drones have indeed struck a fuel storage tank at Primorsk. Another, Drozdenko claims, was destroyed by air defenses, though it still caused some damage. One of the drones crashed, damaging a power line pole near the village of Yemilovo. In the Vyborg district, firefighters are extinguishing the dry grass in the field where the drone crashed. Efforts to repel the attack are ongoing, the regional governor declared. Well done, Drozdenko, we guess. You managed to avoid using the ridiculous drone debris excuse that Russia so often leans upon when Ukraine's drones strike their targets, though you couldn't quite escape the excuse entirely. A crashed drone at least isn't a claim that debris from a drone caused a raging fire, so you at least have that going for you. But one fuel storage tank. Mr. Drozdenko, you appear to have forgotten the fact that satellite photographs exist, and they reveal far more about what has happened in Primorsk than you would like the world to know. Those photos, which are shared by the Euromaidan Press X account, show that it isn't just one tank that Ukraine destroyed. At least 4 have gone up in flames as a result of Ukraine's strike, and as the fires still rage in Primorsk, there is always the possibility that more could be set aflame. The satellite photographs reveal that Primorsk's fuel storage tanks are set out in banks of 2. One of those banks is completely destroyed, indicating 2 tanks are down. In 2 other banks, we see 1 storage tank each on fire, plus the smoke from those fires obscures the view of the other banks in the photograph, which could mean that 5 or 6 tanks have been taken out. This is a huge loss for Russia, and Ukraine's strike was big enough to force personnel evacuations and the shutdown of a port that is critical to Putin's efforts to use the shadow fleet to keep billions of dollars of oil money flowing into Moscow. But before we dig deeper into that, we told you that the strike on Primorsk was different from most of Ukraine's other strikes because of the weapon that Ukraine used. We can see that from the fact that Ukraine has hit Primorsk before. Back in September 2025, Ukraine launched a drone strike at the very same port that it had hit on March 23rd. The strike had an impact. It was part of a 221 drone onslaught that Ukraine delivered to multiple Russian regions, and it caused fires to break out on both a vessel docked at Primorsk and at a pumping station in the oil export hub. However, for as impressive as those results may have been, they don't compare to 4 massive fuel storage tanks being sent up in flames. That tells us that Ukraine didn't use standard long-range drones for its latest Primorsk attack. It used something different, a weapon that has been called a drone-missile hybrid, and that has been giving Ukraine the ability to not only strike deep into Russian territory, but to strike harder than it ever has before. That weapon is the Flamingo. And according to the Telegraph, the considerably more explosive results that we've seen on March 23rd indicate that Ukraine has used some sort of missile against Primorsk, rather than drones. The Flamingo is the front-runner, and it's easy to see why. The Flamingo is everything that Ukraine's deep strike strategy has been missing over the last couple of years. With a range of 3,000 kilometers, or about 1,860 miles, and a warhead that packs a devastating 1,150 kilogram, or just over 2,530 pound explosive punch, the Flamingo can easily deliver 10 times more of the firepower that a standard long-range drone can deliver. The drone missile hybrid is built in Ukraine, and it offers an alternative to the Western-made Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles that Ukraine has used in the past, which are limited both in their range and in the fact that Ukraine often has to seek permission from the missile makers before the strike. No such problems exist for the Flamingo. And the fact that the facility that Ukraine just hit is around 1,000 kilometers or around 621 miles from the border that Ukraine shares with Russia tells us that Ukraine had to have used a weapon that combines range with severe firepower. The Flamingo is the frontrunner, as Ukraine appears to have turned Primorsk pink before it set the port ablaze. In a few minutes, we're going to explain why Ukraine chose Primorsk as its latest target. But before we do, you likely know enough about Ukraine's long-range strikes at this point to guess that Primorsk isn't the only target that has been hit. And that was the case on March 23rd too, as more of Russia's oil infrastructure ended up burning up under the weight of Ukraine's drone strikes. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said as much in a Telegram post, where it also confirmed Ukraine's attack on Primorsk. The Bashneft Ufa-Neftekhim oil refinery was also hit. A fire on the territory of the enterprise has been confirmed. The Bashneft Ufa-Neftekhim oil refinery is an important link in the supply of fuel of the Russian armed forces, the General Staff reported. That refinery is in Ufa, which is part of the Republic of Bashkortostan. It's about 1,400 kilometers or almost 870 miles away from Ukraine. Was the Flamingo used in this strike too? If it was, the General Staff isn't saying anything, and it hasn't revealed which weapon it used to strike Primorsk. What the General Staff did point out is that the Ufa refinery is responsible for processing between 6 and 8 million tons of crude oil per year, which it refines into usable products, including fuel and lubricants, which can then be used by the Russian military inside Ukraine. If you take out the refineries, you destroy the liquid lifeblood of the Russian war machine. And as you'll find out if you stick with us, that isn't the only type of lifeblood that Ukraine has sapped from Russia with its latest round of drone strikes. There's also one more attack to cover. Adding to all of this, the Telegraph reports that Ukraine completed a strike at the Ust-Luga export hub, which is another major piece of Russia's oil infrastructure. As with the Primorsk hub, operations were suspended at Ust-Luga in the wake of the attack, which caused a fire at a facility that is reported to handle around 700,000 barrels of oil every day. Exports have restarted at that Baltic Sea port, Reuters reported on March 23rd. However, the same can't be said at Primorsk, as Ukraine has delivered a powerful blow not just to Russia's Baltic Sea presence, but to the shadow fleet that has been key to keeping the Kremlin's coffers filled with dirty oil-stained money, as Putin pushes the Ukraine invasion even deeper into its fifth year. What Ukraine has just achieved is the showcasing of one of the largest, though perhaps underestimated, vulnerabilities in the entire Russian war machine. The Baltic region is bigger for Putin than even he would like to admit, and we'll tell you why in just a moment. But before we do, this is a quick side note to remind you that you are watching The Military Show. There's a lot more where this came from, so hit subscribe if you're getting value from our channel. First up, there's why Primorsk matters to Russia's presence in the Baltic Sea and the money that flows into the Kremlin's coffers. As Euromaidan Press points out, Primorsk is a key node in Russia's oil export network in the Baltic Sea, as it handles about 60 million tons of crude oil every single year. According to the Independent Petroleum Association of America, a metric ton of foreign crude oil, which Russia's oil certainly is, amounts to 6.99 barrels. Multiply that by 60 million, and you get 419.4 million barrels of oil shipping out of Primorsk every single year. That number is going to become important later when we do a few more sums, but for now, it's enough to know that Ukraine has just taken a port that contributes billions of dollars to Putin's war coffers offline, perhaps for days, if not weeks. And the fact that Ukraine struck oil storage tanks was smart too, as it means that oil is burning as Primorsk is shut down, costing Russia even more money. Primorsk is central to Russia's entire military, as it handles the storage, refining, and transportation of fuel that is used by Putin's soldiers in Ukraine. But perhaps even more importantly than that, Primorsk is a hub for the shadow fleet of ships that Putin has built up to help Russia skirt the sanctions that Ukraine's allies have levied against Russian oil in the wake of Putin's invasion. That fleet is massive, though its secretive nature makes it difficult to get concrete numbers on how large it is and what sort of dollar figures are involved in terms of its creation and the amount of money that it generates for Russia. According to Sky News, there are up to 800 vessels in the shadow fleet, many of which are aging oil tankers that should have been taken off the water years ago, but are being kept afloat despite being worn out and poorly maintained, also that Russia can continue selling its oil. Ukrainian Shipping Magazine said in mid-2025 that Russia had spent $14 billion on its shadow fleet up to that point, though the number is likely several billion dollars higher now, as there is no indication that Russia has stopped buying vessels. As for the return on that investment, Geopolitical Monitor reports that Russia managed to make about $9.4 billion of additional revenue from its shadow fleet in 2024 alone. If we assume a similar return for the other years the shadow fleet has been operational, then it has paid back what the Kremlin has invested several times over. The same outlet reports that the shadow fleet now accounts for about 89% of Russia's crude oil exports, along with 70% of the seaborne oil that Russia sells. The Shadow Fleet now appears to be bigger than Russia's official fleet of oil tankers, and Primorsk is one of the key hubs of this entire shady operation. Every day that the Shadow Fleet isn't able to do what Putin designed it to do is a massive blow to him. That's according to Raivo Vara, who is an economics expert who explains just how important Primorsk and Ust-Luga are to Russia's Shadow Fleet. He explains that more than 60% of Russia's oil is exported from these two ports alone, and he estimates that the tankers that head into Primorsk have capacities of around 120,000 tons. With that sheer size, each of these tankers can transport between $50 and $60 million of oil. So every day that they spend being delayed in the Baltic region is a day longer before that oil money reaches Russia and can be taxed by the Kremlin. That's per ship, by the way. There may end up being dozens of delays caused by the Primorsk shutdown. That will only have a negative impact on Russia as Putin attempts to push forward with a spring offensive that is off to such a disastrous start in Ukraine that it's already led to Russia suffering the highest number of casualties that it's experienced in a single day so far in 2026. Less money flows in, less money is spent on the offensive, even more Russian soldiers die. It's a pretty simple logic to follow, and on top of that, there is a possibility that Ukraine's Primorsk strike could cause issues for the other, even shadier things the Shadow Fleet is accused of doing in the Baltic Sea. As the number of Shadow Fleet vessels sailing those waters has risen, so too have reports of fires and damage to undersea communications and energy infrastructure that lies under the Baltic waves. Russia's Shadow Fleet is a threat not just because of how it keeps oil money pumping into Russia, but also in terms of the direct impact it has on the security of nations that share the Baltic waters, many of which are NATO members. And all of this is without even mentioning how Russia's deployment of decrepit tankers to ship oil could have disastrous environmental effects. It only takes one of these 120,000-ton capacity tankers to spring a leak to cause an ecological storm in the Baltic Sea. Ukraine attacking Primorsk could be a way for the country to make one of Russia's most important Baltic Sea ports too hot to handle. Putin knows now that Ukraine can hit Primorsk. Not just that, it can hit Primorsk with weapons that have enough firepower to devastate the port's infrastructure. If those hits keep coming, is Russia going to risk continuing to use Primorsk as its oil export hub? It might. That would just mean more oil burning. But if Russia pulls out, it loses the security threat that it has created in the Baltic Sea via the Shadow Fleet, which could be just as damaging to Putin's ambitions. The Baltic Sea was supposed to be a place where Putin could project power, but in an ironic twist, it has just been exposed as one of Russia's greatest vulnerabilities. For as much as we see Russia trying to cause chaos in the Baltic region through its hybrid attacks against the likes of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, there is always a method to this type of madness. The Kremlin wants controlled chaos in the Baltic region, through which it can project the power we just mentioned. When Ukraine goes and does something like unleashing powerful missiles and drones or missile-drone hybrids against a key Russian Baltic Sea port, the control disappears, and only the chaos remains. Putin can't afford that. Russia's military posturing in the Baltic Sea can only go so far before it gets a NATO response, and it's been towing the line well up to this point. That's how the Shadow Fleet has managed to remain so active in these waters. Now, and as it has so often done in its war with Russia, Ukraine is trying to push Putin into decisions that he doesn't want to make. Russian assets in the Baltic Sea are becoming targets, and this exposes how reliant Russia is on this particular waterway. That's the vulnerability, and again it all comes down to cold hard cash. Shadow Fleet included, Russia generates about $100 billion per year from its exports that travel through the Baltic Sea and onto other countries. That's according to a June 2025 report by Ukraine World, which adds that as many as 100 tankers move through the Baltic waters every month to take Russian oil to Putin's buyers. The Baltic Sea is so important to Russia that the revenue generated through exports via that waterway alone rivals the military aid provided to Ukraine by Western nations. Granted, not all of that money goes straight to the Kremlin, but it is taxed by Russia, and that adds up to many billions of dollars per year that can be used to fund the Ukraine war. Earlier we mentioned that we'd be doing a few more sums based on the capacity of the Primorsk oil terminal. These figures highlight just how much of an economic lifeline the port is for Russia as it wages war against Ukraine. Since the US launched Operation Epic Fury against Iran, the price of a barrel of oil has shot up, often reaching and exceeding $100 per barrel. That's brilliant news for Putin. Russia has survived by offering its dirty oil at a steep discount against the standard price of crude, so a higher price means more money, even with the discount applied. According to Euronews, Russia was offering a discount of about $25 per barrel as recently as December 2025. If we assume that same discount being applied now that oil is hitting the $100 per barrel region, that gives us an approximate figure of $75 per barrel for Russia's oil. Now remember that Euromaidan Press also says that Primorsk processes about 60 million tons of crude oil annually, which amounts to 419.4 million barrels. Assuming the discount figure we just mentioned, in a situation where oil prices don't come down substantially, as may happen if the US prolongs Operation Epic Fury, that will mean that Primorsk alone is responsible for pumping over $31.4 billion into Russia's economy this year. That situation can't be allowed to stand. Ukraine knows it, and that's why it's hit Primorsk. This port is somewhat irreplaceable to Putin, both in terms of Baltic Sea power projection and the sheer amount of money that it generates for the invasion. For Ukraine, taking out this port now means less money for Putin later. It also serves as a reminder that the Ukraine war is still very much being fought, even as much of the world's attention has been diverted to what the US is doing in Iran. As drones, most likely Flamingo missile drone hybrids, hit Primorsk, Ukraine keeps itself on the international agenda. Meanwhile, Putin watches something that he can't replace get snatched away from Russia. And Primorsk isn't the only irreplaceable thing that Putin has lost during the last few days. Before the Primorsk strike, Ukraine's drones took aim at a key base used by Russia's elite unmanned aerial vehicle specialists Rubicon. That base is now gone. Rubicon is shattered, and Russia's drone war has been disrupted. Find out how in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit subscribe so you stay ahead of the curve on all of Ukraine's latest and most devastating strikes. And thanks for watching.